Lesson 17. Lesson 17 has several parts. The first part is about factors and coefficients, then we'll talk about terms, and finally we'll work with the distributive property. So for factors, you've heard that word factors before, and hopefully you remember that factors are just the numbers that are multiplied in a multiplication problem. So numbers being multiplied. If we had the problem, let's make this a simple one. Let's say 4 times 6, 4 times 6, that's equal to 24, equals 24. 4 is a factor, 6 is a factor, and 24 would be the product, because product is the answer to a multiplication problem. Now in this lesson we've got another vocabulary word, and that other vocabulary word we can see up at the top is coefficient. Okay? And when we're talking about coefficients, we're talking about algebraic statements. We're talking about statements or terms that have both a number and a variable. So let's say we had a value of 4x, or a term of 4x. If we have a term of 4x, okay, the 4 is going to be the coefficient because that's what's being multiplied against x. So the coefficient is going to be the 4. If we had the value of, let's say, x times y times 4, okay, the coefficient is always what's out in front. So the x times y is going to be our coefficient. Okay? If we look at one more, let's say we have 4x times y. What do you think is the coefficient there? Remember, the coefficient is the number or variable out in front. Hopefully you said 4x. The 4x, that whole thing, is our coefficient. Now it's important to know these vocabulary words even though we didn't do any actual math there, so that we're able to understand what questions are asking us as we move through the next few lessons. Terms. Okay? A term. Well, if we had the number 3, 3 is an example of a term. If we had 4x, 4x is an example of a term. Let's say we had 5xy squared over z. That's a term. A term is a number or a number in variables that are all together either being multiplied or divided. Now, let's look at this. Let's say we have 3 plus 4x. Okay, 3 plus 4x. This is two terms. Okay, we've got one term here, the 3. And we've got one term here, the 4x. Okay, this is not a division bar. Okay, this is just a separation. Okay, that's two terms. Let's say we had 5xy squared over z plus 4x minus 3. How many terms do we have there? Well, hopefully you said we have 3 terms because we have one term here, we have one term here, and we have a final term here. Okay? So it's important we can identify single terms and when we have an expression that has multiple terms. 2 terms would be a binomial, and 3 terms would be a trinomial. Those are the most common types of expressions that we see. Now, looking at that, we can work with the distributive property. The distributive property looks like this. And if you look at your textbook, this is the definition. It says A times the sum of B and C is equal to the product of A and B plus the product of A and C. And we can use this distributive property to help us to expand expressions that contain variables. That's the most common and the most useful point for it. Now if we use the distributive property, we can look at a problem like this. Let's say we have 4 times 3 plus 1. If we had this, there's 2 different ways to solve. Of course, we could say 3 plus 1 in parentheses, that's 4, times our 4. We get an answer that's equal to 16. Okay? If we did it the other way, we're going to say A times B plus a times c. So the way that works is like this. We're going to multiply these first two, then we're going to multiply the first and the third. We're going to get 4 times 3, that's 12, plus, then we're going to multiply 4 times 1, that's 4. We get 12 plus 4, that's equal to 16. Okay, so that's how the distributive property works with numbers. Now, if we want to use this in a very useful situation, it might look like this. 4 times, let's say, x plus 2. Now this one we can expand out by using that distributive property. We can multiply the 4 times the x, then multiply the 4 times the 2 and add them together. So we're going to get 4x, 4 times x, plus 8. And this one we've been able to move it into a different form that may be more helpful for us to solve it in the end. And that's how we're going to use the distributive property when we have either numbers all the way through or numbers and variables. Okay, let's use the distributive property to expand this problem. We have negative 3 times the difference of 2x and 4. So we're going to multiply first, and we're going to multiply second, and we're going to be subtracting in the middle. So we have negative 3 times 2x. Negative 3 times 2 is negative 6. And then we have negative 6x, because negative 3 times 2x must be negative 6x. Minus, okay, and then we have negative 3 times 4. Negative 3 times 4, negative 3 times 4 is going to have to give us negative 12. And you can notice we've got a double negative that came from here and here, so that's going to turn into a positive. So we get negative 6x plus 12, and we're all done. We can't simplify that anymore. We can't add something like negative 6x plus 12 because they're not like terms. They don't have the same variable attached to them. So we're all done. This is how we leave our answer. Our lesson practice for this lesson will be on page 77. We'll work on that in class together next time I see you. Make sure you've got your notes done. Come prepared for your next class, and have a nice afternoon.